The stars of Middle-earth had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, the forging of great evils, and the slow dimming of ancient lights. They had watched the First Age burn with the theft of the Silmarils, seen the drowning of Númenor beneath wrathful waves, and now bore silent witness to the Third Age's twilight, a time when shadow crept back across the world and the free peoples forgot the glory of their fathers. But even stars, ancient and cold, could be surprised. Tonight they watched something unprecedented, a tearing in the fabric of reality itself, as magic foreign to Arda's song collided with the malice of the One Ring seeking new vessels for corruption. The result was a wound between worlds. Drizzt Do'Urden crashed through darkness into deeper darkness. The Drow Ranger hit forest floor hard, centuries of trained reflexes turning his fall into a roll that brought him to his feet with both scimitars, Twinkle and Icing Death, already drawn. Purple eyes adjusted instantly to the gloom, dark vision piercing the shadows of enormous trees that stretched overhead like cathedral pillars. This wasn't the Underdark. Wrong smell, wrong feel. The air moved here carrying scents of rot and spider musk and something else, a wrongness that made his skin crawl with recognition he couldn't quite place. Mirkwood did not welcome strangers, especially those who arrived wreathed in unnatural darkness. "Gwenhwyvar," Drizzt whispered, reaching for the onyx figurine at his belt. The magic felt sluggish, resistant, as though he were pulling the panther through thick mud instead of across the planar divide. When the gray mist finally coalesced into 600 pounds of feline muscle and intelligence, Gwenhwyvar's ears flattened immediately. The panther sensed it too. Wrongness, danger, and the peculiar heaviness in the air that suggested powerful magic at work. Around them, Mirkwood's canopy blocked even the starlight Drizzt hadn't yet seen. This forest was sick, he realized, reading the signs with a ranger's trained eye. The trees here grew twisted, their bark weeping dark sap. Spider webs the size of fishing nets stretched between branches, and in the distance, he heard the clicking of mandibles far too large to belong to any natural creature. His hand tightened on Twinkle's hilt, the blade's blue glow flaring to life and pushing back the oppressive darkness. That light saved his life. The web came from above, sticky strands thick as rope, cast by something that had been waiting in the diseased canopy. Drizzt's combat instincts, honed through centuries of survival in the Underdark's most lethal depths, translated observation into motion without conscious thought. He dove aside, Twinkle's enchanted edge slicing through the web as Icing Death came around in a defensive arc. Gwenhwyvar roared and leaped, vanishing into the shadows with predatory grace. The spider that descended was larger than a horse, its 8 eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence and hunger. Not Underdark spawn, something worse. This creature carried the taint of deliberate corruption, as though natural law had been twisted by a malice both ancient and personal. 2 more dropped from the canopy flanking positions, working together with coordinated precision that spoke of dark cunning, and Drizzt didn't wait for them to complete their encirclement. He launched himself forward with the supernatural speed that made Drow warriors legendary, becoming a whirling storm of enchanted steel. Twinkle carved through one spider's foreleg, while Icing Death, the Frostbrand scimitar, opened a freezing wound across the creature's thorax. The spider shrieked, a sound like metal scraping stone, and tried to bite with fangs that dripped venom black as pitch. Drizzt was already moving, his body flowing through the combat forms he'd mastered over 2 centuries of constant warfare. These weren't the elegant duels of surface world swordmasters. This was the brutal, efficient killing art of the Underdark, where hesitation meant death and mercy was a concept reserved for those who could afford weakness. He couldn't afford weakness, and he never had been able to. The second spider died as Gwenhwyvar's jaws closed around its head with bone-crushing force, while Drizzt's blades worked in perfect synchronization. High-low, slash-thrust, defense and offense merged into a single continuous flow of motion. The third spider tried to retreat, but Icing Death's frost magic slowed its movements just enough. Twinkle's blade, glowing with its own inner light, found the gap in its carapace and ended its flight. Silence returned to Mirkwood, broken only by Drizzt's controlled breathing and Gwenhwyvar's low growl. The panther's ears remained flat, swiveling to track sounds Drizzt couldn't yet hear. They weren't alone. The forest watched them with countless unseen eyes, weighing, judging, in and finding this dark-skinned stranger with the white hair and weapons of sundered light to be something that didn't belong. Drizzt cleaned his blades with practiced efficiency, his ranger senses extending outward to map his surroundings. Wherever he was, it wasn't Faerun. The magic here felt different, older, more fundamental, woven into the world's bones rather than layered atop it. And that wrongness he'd sensed? It pressed against his consciousness like a physical weight, a corruption that reminded him uncomfortably of Menzoberranzan's ambient evil, but colder, more patient, more absolute in its hunger. In the distance, elvish voices called out in a language he didn't recognize, but the tone was universal. Pursuit, anger, and the drawing of bows. Drizzt Do'Urden, who had spent his entire life running from those who judged him by his heritage rather than his deeds, felt the familiar weight of exile settle once more upon his shoulders. Whatever world this was, he suspected his dark skin and heritage would mark him as an enemy long before his actions could prove otherwise. The voices drew closer. Gwenhwyvar pressed against his leg, a reassuring presence that had been his only constant companion through decades of loneliness. "Once more, my friend," Drizzt murmured, violet eyes scanning the darkness for routes of escape or positions of defense. "Once more we prove what we are by what we do, not what we appear to be. The road goes ever on." The elvish voices grew louder, and Drizzt heard the distinctive sound of arrows being nocked. He didn't sheathe his weapons. In this new world, under these strange stars he still hadn't glimpsed, he would face whatever judgment came with the same principle that had guided him through a lifetime of prejudice. He would not strike first, but neither would he die meekly for the crime of his birth. Twinkle's light blazed brighter in the darkness, and the Drow Ranger stood ready to meet whatever came next. The wood elves of Mirkwood moved through their diseased forest with the silent grace of those who had walked beneath these boughs for thousands of years. 20 warriors, bows drawn and arrows nocked with gray-feathered shafts, emerged from the shadows in a perfect encirclement. Their leader, a tall elf with hair like copper autumn leaves and eyes that held the weariness of too many years fighting the forest's corruption, raised his hand in a gesture that needed no translation. Surrender or die. Drizzt lowered his scimitars slowly, angling the blades downward in a posture that was non-threatening but ready. Gwenhwyvar growled low in her throat, but the drow placed a calming hand on the panther's head. He'd been here before, surrounded by those who saw only his dark skin and assumed evil intent. The script was depressingly familiar, even though the actors wore different faces. "I mean no harm," Drizzt said carefully in Common, then repeated the sentiment in Elvish, Drow Elvish, the language of the Underdark. It was a mistake. The effect was instantaneous. Every bow drew back another inch, and the copper-haired leader's face went pale with something beyond fear, with recognition of an ancient evil returned. One of the younger elves spoke rapidly in their own tongue, the words tumbling over themselves. "Mordor, servant of the first shadow, Morgoth's spawn reborn." "I am no servant of darkness," Drizzt said firmly, keeping his movements minimal and controlled. "I am a ranger, a wanderer who—" "You speak the black speech," the leader interrupted, his Western accented but clear. "You bear the mark of the first enemy, skin of deepest night, eyes of demon fire. You appear in our forest where Sauron's corruption grows, slaying spiders that serve the necromancer. Perhaps you come to take their place as his agent in Mirkwood." "The spiders attacked me," Drizzt protested. "I defended myself and—" "Summon forth no more demons," another elf shouted, arrow trained on Gwenhwyvar. "The shadow beast shall not—" "She is no demon." Drizzt's voice carried an edge now, the protective instinct overriding diplomatic caution. "Gwenhwyvar is my companion, bound by honor and friendship, not dark magic." The copper-haired elf studied him with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. "I am Galion, captain of the Woodland Guard. You will come before King Thranduil and answer for your presence in his realm. If you resist, we will assume you are what you appear to be, a servant of the enemy, a sent to undermine us from within. If you come willingly, you may yet prove your words true, though I have lived 3,000 years and never seen one of your kind walk in any light save that of Morgoth's malice." Drizzt felt the familiar ache of ancient injustice, the burden of being condemned for ancestors' sins. But he sheathed Twinkle and Icing Death with deliberate slowness, showing empty hands. "I will come willingly. I have nothing to hide." "The Shadow Beast?" Galion asked, arrow still trained on Gwenhwyvar. "Returns to her home," Drizzt said, hating the necessity but recognizing the danger. He pulled the onyx figurine from his belt, and Gwenhwyvar's eyes met his with understanding before the panther dissolved into gray mist. The wood elves stepped back involuntarily, several making warding gestures. "Dark sorcery," one whispered. Or darker still," another agreed. They bound his wrists with rope woven from living vines that thrummed with elvish enchantment, not cruel bindings, but utterly secure. Drizzt didn't struggle. He'd walked this path before in Luskan, in Silverymoon, in a dozen surface cities where his appearance triggered fear and hatred. The only difference here was that these elves were immortal, their memories stretching back to evils Drizzt couldn't imagine. Whatever Morgoth was, whatever darkness they associated with his drow heritage, it had left scars that millennia couldn't heal. The journey through Mirkwood took hours, and with each passing mile, Drizzt felt the forest's corruption more keenly. This wasn't natural decay or the harsh balance of predator and prey he knew from his ranger training, so something deliberate and malicious had taken root here, twisting life into forms that served hunger and cruelty. It reminded him too much of Menzoberranzan, where even beauty was poisoned by Lolth's touch. They emerged into a vast cavern carved into a hillside, where the woodland realm spread in organic architecture that merged living wood with stone. Lanterns glowed with soft golden light, and despite their fear of him, Drizzt couldn't help but admire the craftsmanship. The wood elves had created something beautiful even in the shadow of corruption, maintaining hope and culture against the encroaching darkness. It made what came next even harder. The throne room of Thranduil was a soaring space where tree roots formed natural pillars and autumn leaves drifted perpetually in magical suspension. The Elven King sat upon a throne of carved oak and elk antlers, his face angular and proud, crowned with a circlet of autumn berries and gold. When Drizzt was brought before him, Thranduil rose slowly, and the drow saw something in those ancient eyes that went beyond mere suspicion. The Elven King looked at him with horror. "Impossible," Thranduil breathed, descending the steps of his dais. "I have lived since before the sun and moon were made from the last flowers of the two trees. I fought in the War of Wrath when Morgoth was cast into the void. I saw the Noldor who bore the curse of kinslaying, witnessed Sauron's deceptions in fair form, and watched kingdoms of men rise and fall in corruption. But never, never in all my years have I seen one of the Morikendi so utterly consumed by darkness that their very flesh became as midnight." "I am drow," Drizzt said quietly. Of the Underdark, from a city called Menzoberranzan. I am not of your world. Some magic or dimensional rift brought me here against my will. Lies, said a voice from beside the throne. An advisor, silver-haired and stern, stepped forward. The Morikendi are elves who never saw the light of Valinor, who turned to shadow in the ancient days. But this is corruption made flesh. Either Morgoth's evil has returned in new form, or Sauron has found ways to twist elvenkind beyond recognition. I was born to darkness, Drizzt agreed, his voice steady despite the accusation. But I chose to reject it. My people worship a demon goddess of chaos and murder. I refused her and fled to the surface world, where I have spent 2 centuries proving by my deeds that heritage does not define destiny. Thranduil studied him with the calculating gaze of one who had outlived empires. Fine words. Evil often wears the mask of righteousness. The enemy himself appeared as Anatar the Fair, bringing gifts and wisdom to the elven smiths before revealing his true nature. Why should I believe you are different? Because, Drizzt said, meeting the Elven King's eyes without flinching, I ask nothing from you except the chance to prove what I am through action, not appearance. I have no agenda here. I seek only to understand where I am and find a way home. Or if that is impossible, to find a place where I might live by the principles I hold dear. The principles of a dark elf, the advisor scoffed. What principles could such a creature hold beyond treachery and murder? The words struck a nerve Drizzt had thought calloused by decades of similar accusations. But here, in this strange world where even the immortal elves looked at him with revulsion, the old wound reopened. Honor, he said softly. Friendship. The belief that one's actions matter more than one's birth. The conviction that darkness can be resisted even when it dwells within your own heart. Thranduil was silent for a long moment, autumn leaves drifting around him in their eternal dance. You speak with conviction, but conviction proves nothing. Sauron is convinced of his righteousness, believing he brings order to a chaotic world. The test is not what you believe, but what you do when belief is tested. Then test me, Drizzt said simply. Oh, I shall, the Elven King replied, and there was something dangerous in his smile. You arrived in the darkest part of my forest where Sauron's corruption festers like an open wound. If you are truly what you claim, a ranger who fights against evil, then you will help us cleanse it. If you are a servant of the enemy, you will reveal yourself when confronted with the shadow. Either way, the truth will emerge. And if I prove myself, Drizzt asked, then perhaps, Thranduil said slowly, you will be the first of your kind to walk free in my realm. But know this, Dark One, I will be watching. One false step, one moment of treachery, and you will learn that elven mercy has limits. The dungeons beneath my halls have held darker things than you. It wasn't trust, it wasn't even acceptance, but it was a chance, which was more than Drizzt had dared hope for when the arrows first surrounded him. I ask only for the opportunity to prove my worth, Drizzt said. Thranduil gestured and the vine bindings fell away from Drizzt's wrists. You will be accompanied by my warriors at all times. Your weapons are returned. They are too fine to be the work of Shadowspawn, and I would know their origins. You will explain their making while we hunt. Drizzt accepted Twinkle and Icing Death gratefully, feeling complete again with their familiar weight. They were forged by a dwarf named Brunor Battlehammer, my adopted father, and enchanted by wizards of my world. Twinkle lights the darkness and strikes true. Icing Death bears frost magic and protects against fire. A dwarf, Thranduil mused. At least that part of your tale has the ring of truth. Only the Khazad would create weapons of such quality. and only a fool would claim dwarven craftsmanship falsely where it could be disproven. He paused. You called this dwarf your father? By choice, not blood, Drizzt confirmed. He saw past my skin to what lay beneath, as I hope you might, given time. The Elven King's expression was unreadable. Time will tell, Drizzt Do'Urden of the Underdark. Time and the choices you make when the shadow calls to what you claim to have rejected. Dawn in Mirkwood was a rumor rather than a reality, the sun's light barely penetrating the corrupted canopy. Drizzt stood at the forest's edge with Galleon and 5 wood elf warriors, studying the terrain ahead where the corruption grew thickest. Spiderwebs stretched like siege engines between trees that wept black sap, and in the shadows things moved with purpose that had nothing to do with natural hunger. The necromancer's influence spreads from Dol Guldur in the south, Galleon explained, his tone marginally less hostile now that Thranduil had given grudging permission for this trial. What was once a Mont Blanc, a green hill, is now a fortress of shadow. His servants multiply in the darkness, orcs, spiders, wargs, and worse things. We patrol these borders constantly, pushing back the tide, but it is like bailing water from a sinking ship. Drizzt understood that kind of war. In the Underdark, the drow city of Menzoberranzan had existed in similar tension, surrounded by enemies and sustained only by constant vigilance and brutal efficiency. You need to strike at the source, he observed. We do not have the strength, one of the younger elves admitted. King Thranduil has grown cautious. Too many of our people have sailed west to Valinor, leaving us diminished. He guards what remains rather than risk everything in direct confrontation. It was a pragmatic strategy, but Drizzt heard the frustration beneath the words. These were warriors forced to fight defensively while evil grew stronger, watching their homes slowly consumed. He knew that helplessness intimately. A scream cut through the morning air, elvish and desperate. Osgalian's head snapped toward the sound. Scouts! They were mapping spider nest locations in the eastern glades. He didn't hesitate, sprinting toward the cry with his warriors flowing behind him like autumn wind through trees. Drizzt ran with them, his drow speed keeping pace easily, and for the first time since arriving in this world, he felt the familiar clarity of purpose that came with imminent combat. They burst into a clearing where 3 scouts fought for their lives against a dozen spiders, each one the size of a pony. But these weren't the mindless beasts Drizzt had killed upon his arrival. These moved with coordinated intelligence, using their webs to separate the elves and attacking in synchronized waves. One scout was already down, wrapped in silk cocoon and being dragged toward the trees. Another bled from a dozen cuts, her bow broken and her long knives flashing desperately against mandibles and fangs. Galleon's warriors loosed arrows with devastating accuracy, but the spiders had learned caution. They used their captive as a shield, forcing the wood elves to check their shots or risk killing their own. Drizzt didn't have that problem. He drew on his drow heritage, the innate magic that ran in dark elf blood like a second heartbeat, and spoke the word of power that summoned darkness. A globe of absolute blackness erupted in the clearing center, swallowing 4 spiders and the cocooned scout completely. The elves cried out in alarm, but Drizzt was already moving, his dark vision piercing the magical darkness as easily as noonday sun. Inside the sphere of shadow, he was the apex predator. Twinkle and Icing Death became extensions of his will, the scimitars moving in the intricate patterns of the Underdark fighting style called Gentaxel, the Dusk Reaper. He flowed between the spiders like water finding gaps in stone, each movement precise and economical. High slash severed a leg joint, low thrust found the soft underbelly. Spinning dodge carried him past snapping mandibles, while Icing Death's frost magic slowed his enemy's reactions just enough to ensure his blades arrived first. The first spider died without understanding what killed it. The second managed a shriek before Twinkle's enchanted edge opened its skull. The third and fourth tried to retreat but found only the boundary of the darkness sphere, and Drizzt was there, scimitars working in perfect synchronization, thrust, parry, slash, kill. The darkness faded as Drizzt's magic expired. The wood elves stood frozen, their arrows half-drawn, staring at the drow warrior who stood amid 4 dead spiders, his blade still glowing with residual magic. The cocoon scout lay at his feet, alive and already being cut free by Drizzt's careful blade work. The remaining spiders, seeing half their pack dead in heartbeats, fled into the forest's depths. Galen slowly lowered his bow. That darkness, you summoned shadow itself. Drow innate magic, Drizzt confirmed, cleaning his blades. It's part of what I am. I cannot change my heritage, only choose how I use the abilities it grants. Shadow magic, one elf whispered. Just as the legends say, Morgoth's servants commanded darkness to hide their deeds. Or, Drizzt countered, his patience thinning, I use the abilities I was born with to save your kin's life. Even the tool is not inherently evil. Intent defines morality. The scout he'd freed struggled to her feet with Gallian's help, coughing and gasping. She was young by elven standards, perhaps only a few centuries old, with hair black as midnight and eyes like storm clouds. She looked at Drizzt with wonder rather than fear. You saved me. Moved like lightning in darkness. I've never seen anyone fight like that. You're Tauriel, are you not? Galen asked. I told you the eastern approach was too dangerous. And I told you we needed intelligence on their nest-building patterns, she replied with spirit that reminded Drizzt of another strong-willed female warrior he'd known. Catti-brie, his human companion who'd never seen his skin as anything but surface deep. The dark elf proved right. They're coordinating, learning from our tactics. Dark elf, Drizzt corrected gently. Drow. And yes, they're far too organized. Something guides them beyond simple hunger. He knelt beside one of the dead spiders, examining its carapace with a ranger's practiced eye. There, subtle marks burned into the kite and symbols that made his skin crawl with recognition. Not drow glyphs, but similar in their malevolent intent. Marks of binding, of compulsion magic. These spiders are enslaved, Drizzt said quietly. Some dark will commands them. They're not simply predators. They're soldiers in someone's army. Galen crouched beside him, studying the marks with growing alarm. Necromancy. The shadow in Dol Guldur extends its reach further than we knew. He looked at Drizzt with something that might have been grudging respect. You read these signs as easily as we read tree growth. I was raised in a city where every creature was either enslaved or enslaver, Drizzt replied. You learn to recognize the chains even when they're magical rather than physical. The scouting party gathered their wounded and dead. One scout had perished before Drizzt's arrival, and began the somber journey back to the woodland realm. But Tauriel fell into step beside Drizzt, her curiosity overcoming traditional elven caution. Where did you learn to fight like that? She asked. Even our greatest warriors don't move with such speed and precision. The Underdark, Drizzt said simply. Imagine a world of stone tunnels and caverns where death waits in every shadow, where your own family might murder you for status, where mercy is weakness and compassion is exploited. You adapt or die. I adapted. But you left, Tauriel observed. You chose to abandon that power and survival in favor of... What? Drizzt was quiet for a moment, listening to the forest around them. Diseased and corrupted though it was, still clinging to life, still beautiful in its stubborn resistance. In favor of living with myself, he said finally. Power means nothing if you lose your soul gaining it. I'd rather die free than live as a slave to evil, even if that evil wrapped itself in the trappings of strength and survival. Tauriel studied him with those storm-gray eyes, and Drizzt wondered what she saw. A monster? A curiosity? Or perhaps, and this thought was dangerous to hope, simply another person trying to do right in a world that made goodness difficult. "You sound like Mithrandir," she said softly. "The gray wizard who sometimes visits our realm. He speaks of choices and the courage to do right when wrong is easier." "Then Mithrandir is wise," Drizzt replied. "I would like to meet him if the opportunity arises." Galion, overhearing, interjected. "Gandalf the Grey travels where he will and answers to no schedule. But if he comes to Mirkwood and learns of you, he will certainly want to investigate. The Astari make it their business to understand all things that walk Middle-earth, especially those who appear from nowhere, wielding powers unknown to our lore." They emerged from the darkest part of the forest as true morning finally broke through the canopy, and Drizzt caught his first clear glimpse of the sky in this strange new world, and stars faded before a sun that seemed subtly wrong to his eyes. Not the harsh burning orb of the Underdark's distant surface, but something deliberate, crafted. As though the sun itself was art rather than nature. Everything here felt like that. Magic woven into reality's fabric rather than imposed upon it. A world sung into being rather than born from chaos. Drizzt felt simultaneously awed and alien, a discordant note in someone else's symphony. When they reached the woodland realm, Thranduil waited in his throne room with a figure Drizzt hadn't seen before. An old man in gray robes and pointed hat, with a beard like storm clouds, and eyes that seemed to see through flesh to the spirit beneath. A wizard, Drizzt realized, but nothing like the flashy spellcasters of Faerun. And this one radiated power the way ancient mountains radiated age. Quietly, inevitably, fundamentally. "So," the wizard said, voice like gravel and honey mixed together, "you are the mysterious dark elf who has set the woodland realm into such tumult. I am Gandalf, called the Grey by some, and I have come a long way to meet you, Drizzt Do'Urden." Drizzt bowed respectfully, recognizing both power and wisdom when he encountered them. "How do you know my name?" Gandalf's eyes twinkled with amusement. "I know many things. It is my business to know them. But your name was simple enough. Galian scouts have very keen hearing, and your companion used it when speaking to her panther spirit. A fascinating creature that. I should very much like to see her again and understand the magic that binds you. Gwenhwyvar is bound by friendship, not compulsion," Drizzt said carefully. "She comes when called because she chooses to, not because I command her." "Better and better," Gandalf murmured. "But names and panthers aside, we have more pressing matters. Thranduil, I understand your suspicions, but I have walked many lands and met many peoples in my long years. This drow is not what your fears make him out to be." "You have examined him for mere minutes," Thranduil protested. "How can you be certain?" "Because," Gandalf said, fixing the Elven King with a stare that contained depths of authority, "I have faced true evil, Thranduil. I have looked into the eye of Sauron himself. I know the shadow in all its forms. And this ranger, despite his appearance, does not carry that taint. He carries something else, old pain, fierce determination, and a will that has been tested in fires you cannot imagine. The darkness of his skin is not corruption, it is simply difference." Drizzt felt something unlock in his chest, validation from a stranger who somehow understood. But Gandalf's next words tempered that hope. "However," the wizard continued, "I sense something troubling. You arrived here not by chance, but drawn by a confluence of magics. There is a great evil waking in Middle-earth, an artifact of terrible power that calls to all who bear darkness within them, whether inherited or chosen. Tell me." Drizzt Do'Urden of the Underdark. Do you feel it? A whisper at the edge of thought, promising power to achieve your goals, to end your exile, to finally be accepted? Drizzt went very still. He had felt it, a subtle pressure he'd attributed to the strangeness of this new world, but now that Gandalf named it, he recognized the sensation. It was like Lolth's whispers in the back of his mind during his time in Menzoberranzan, but colder, more seductive, offering not chaos and cruelty, but order, purpose, an end to loneliness. I feel it, he admitted quietly. What is it? Gandalf and Thranduil exchanged glances heavy with unspoken meaning. The wizard sighed, suddenly looking very old. It is why you are here, I suspect. The One Ring, greatest and most terrible of Sauron's works, has begun to stir. It seeks to return to its master, and in seeking it reaches out to those who might serve its purpose. Your arrival in Middle-earth was no accident. The ring sensed you across the barriers between worlds, sensed one who has spent a lifetime fighting inner darkness, and thought you would make an excellent tool. I am no one's tool, Drizzt said flatly. Good, Gandalf replied. Hold to that conviction. You will need it in the days to come. Gandalf's revelation hung in the air like morning mist over a battlefield, present, inescapable and pregnant with danger. Thranduil descended from his throne with the fluid grace of immortal years, his expression carved from ancient stone and older suspicion. The ring stirs, the Elven King said softly, and it has reached across the very void to bring a warrior to Middle-earth, one born to darkness, trained in shadow, and bearing a lifetime of resistance to corruption. He turned those ageless eyes on Drizzt. This is either the enemy's greatest trap or Providence working in ways beyond our understanding. I confess I do not know which. Neither do I, Gandalf admitted, leaning on his staff. The wood seemed to pulse with subtle light as though acknowledging its master's troubled thoughts. But I know this. The ring does not make mistakes in its choosing. It sensed something in you, Drizzt. Either a vulnerability to exploit or a threat to neutralize. We must discover which before events overtake us. Drizzt felt the weight of their scrutiny like physical pressure. Two immortals, one suspicious, one cautiously hopeful, judging whether he represented salvation or doom for a world he'd never asked to enter. The familiar burden of proof settled on his shoulders with the weight of centuries. What is this ring? He asked, needing to understand the enemy. You speak of it as though it were alive, conscious. Because it is, Gandalf replied, beginning to pace the throne room with measured steps. Long ago in the fires of Mount Doom in the land of Mordor, the Dark Lord Sauron forged a ring of power. Into that ring, he poured his malice, his will to dominate all living things and a great portion of his native power. The ring is not merely an object, it is a fragment of Sauron himself, endowed with its own malevolent intelligence and singular purpose, to corrupt all who touch it and return to its master. I have faced artifacts of dark power, Drizzt said, thinking of Crenchinnabon, the crystal shard that had nearly destroyed Icewind Dale. They always promised strength while delivering slavery. Precisely, Gandalf agreed. But the One Ring is more terrible than any artifact your world has known. It offers you your heart's desire, but twists that desire into service of the shadow. For a warrior, it promises victory. For a king, dominion. For one who seeks to protect, it offers the power to save all you love by enslaving them for their own good. And the ring knows your deepest wounds and presents itself as the balm. Drizzt's hand unconsciously went to Twinkle's hilt. And it sensed me? Across worlds? The ring's power grows as its master regains strength, Thranduil interjected. Sauron is not yet returned to full might, but he reaches out from Dol Guldur, the very fortress whose servants you encountered in my forest. When the ring feels threatened or senses opportunity, it acts. Your arrival here in Mirkwood near Dol Guldur itself suggests the ring perceives you as significant. Significant how? Drizzt demanded. I'm one warrior displaced from his world. How could I threaten or serve this Sauron's plans? Gandalf stopped pacing and fixed Drizzt with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh to examine the soul beneath. Tell me, Ranger of the Underdark, in your world, you fought against your evil heritage every day. You resisted a demon goddess and an entire civilization built on cruelty. That resistance defined you, strengthened you, made you what you are. But answer honestly, did you never tire? Never wonder if the struggle was worth the cost? Never wish even for a moment that you could simply surrender and accept what you were born to be? The question struck home like a blade between ribs. Drizzt thought of nights in the Underdark, alone in the darkness when Lolth's whispers had seemed so reasonable. Thought of the moment he'd stood at the edge of Menzoberranzan with his father Zaknafine's teachings in his heart, and the entire drow world at his back, teetering on the edge of choosing death over continued resistance. Thought of every time someone on the surface had looked at him with fear, and he'd wondered if he was fighting for acceptance that would never come. Yes, he admitted quietly. I've been tempted. The darkness promises rest, an end to struggling against my own nature. That, Gandalf said gently, is what the ring sensed, not weakness. Never think that. The ring sensed someone with a lifetime of practice in hearing temptation's voice, someone who knows intimately how seduction works, who has cataloged every argument for surrender. The ring believes such knowledge makes you vulnerable, but I hope it may instead make you uniquely resistant. You recognize the poison because you've tasted it before. Tauriel, who had been listening from the shadows with several other guards, spoke up. Mithrandir, if the ring has drawn him here, does that mean it knows where it is, and that Sauron can find it? The ring was lost long ago, Gandalf said. Even Sauron does not know precisely where it lies, though he suspects it remains in the world. When the ring acts, calling across the void as it apparently did to bring Drizzt here, it risks revealing itself. We must assume Sauron now knows something significant has occurred, even if he doesn't understand what. Thranduil's expression grew darker. Then we are already at war, whether we will it or not. If Sauron sends his servants to investigate, they will find a drow warrior in your forest, Gandalf finished, and they will wonder what such a being portends. The enemy may believe you are his servant sent as a herald, or he may recognize you as a threat and seek to destroy you before you can act. Either way, Drizzt, you have become a piece in a game whose rules you do not yet understand. Drizzt's laugh was short and bitter. I've been a piece in others' games my entire life. The question is always the same. Do I play the role assigned to me, or do I make my own moves? Spoken like a true ranger, Gandalf said with a slight smile. You wander the board freely, unbound by the conventional piece's limitations. That is what Sauron will not expect, that you owe him no allegiance and have no desire for the power he offers. But the ring's call, Thranduil pressed. If it drew him here, will it continue to influence him? Will he even know when it begins to corrupt his thoughts? The question hung in the air, and Drizzt felt its weight. He'd asked himself similar questions about Lolth's influence, whether his rebellion was truly his own choice or simply another form of the Spider Queen's manipulation, testing him for some greater purpose. The uncertainty never fully disappeared. I don't know, he admitted, but I can tell you this. I've spent 200 years learning to recognize corruption's voice. If this ring speaks to me, I will hear it for what it is. Will you? Gandalf asked, not unkindly. The ring does not announce itself with trumpets and declarations. It suggests, it whispers, it presents its arguments through your own thoughts, in your own voice, until you cannot distinguish its desires from your own. Boromir of Gondor, one of the noblest men I have ever known, he fell to the ring's influence without ever touching it, simply by being near it and desiring to protect his people. If you believe you are immune, you are already lost. The harsh truth struck home. Drizzt thought of how Lolth had worked, not through obvious compulsion but through subtle suggestion, through the slow erosion of values until cruelty seemed pragmatic and mercy seemed naive. He'd escaped that influence only through constant vigilance and the help of those who held him accountable. "Then I need allies," Drizzt said. "People who can see when I'm compromised, who can tell me when my thoughts aren't my own." "Now you speak wisdom," Gandalf approved. "The ring cannot be resisted alone. Even the greatest of us would fail in isolation, and it is only through fellowship, through bonds of loyalty and love that transcend power, that corruption can be withstood." Thranduil made a sound that might have been approval or skepticism. "And you would have my people provide this fellowship? Ask them to trust one who looks like the very embodiment of ancient evil?" "I ask only for the opportunity to earn that trust," Drizzt replied. "Your scouts can accompany me. Judge me by my deeds, not my heritage. If I fail the test, then end me quickly, but give me the chance." The Elven King studied him for a long moment, and Drizzt wondered what the immortal elf saw. A potential ally, a certain threat, or simply a problem to be contained. Finally, Thranduil nodded slowly. "Very well. You will remain in Mirkwood under watch. Galion will assign you duties alongside our patrols, fighting the corruption that spreads from Dol Guldur. Prove yourself in battle and behavior. If the ring's influence manifests, we will know, and we will act." It was probation, not trust. But Drizzt had walked this path before in cities and kingdoms across Faerûn. Trust was earned in inches, proved through consistent action over time. He'd learned patience through decades of exile. "I accept," he said simply. Gandalf rapped his staff on the stone floor, producing a sharp crack that seemed to resonate with finality. "Then it is settled. But I warn you all, the ring's attention is a dangerous thing. By drawing Drizzt here, it has set events in motion that cannot be easily stopped. The days ahead will test us all." "The days ahead have been testing us for centuries," Thranduil said wearily. "And what is one more trial?" "Perhaps," Gandalf murmured, "the trial that determines everything." As the council dispersed, Drizzt felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Not the elves' physical observation, but something deeper. A presence at the edge of perception, cold and patient and infinitely malevolent. The ring, he realized. It was watching, waiting, judging whether he would serve its purpose or need to be destroyed. He touched Twinkle's hilt again, drawing comfort from the blade's familiar presence. Whatever this ring was, whatever power it wielded, he had faced down a demon goddess and her entire civilization. He had walked away from everything his people valued to stand alone in the darkness, guided only by principles that seemed to have no practical reward. If the ring thought his lifetime of resistance made him vulnerable, it had miscalculated. Every day he'd fought Lolth's whispers had been training for exactly this kind of battle. The question was whether training would be enough. 3 weeks in Mirkwood taught Drizzt that corruption wore many faces. By day, he patrolled with wood elf warriors, learning the forest's tortured geography and fighting the servants of shadow that multiplied like plague. By night, he sat apart from the elvish halls, tolerated but not welcomed, watched but not trusted. Gwenweaver prowled beside him in these lonely hours, the panther's presence a reminder that at least one being in this world saw him for what he was rather than what he appeared to be. The elves observed him with careful attention, cataloging every movement and decision. They watched as he saved a young scout from warg riders moving with deadly precision through the enemies. They witnessed him show mercy to a captured orc, not releasing it but ensuring its death was quick rather than prolonged, yet refusing to indulge in the cruelty his drow heritage might suggest. They noted how he refused the choicest portions of meat after hunts, how he maintained his weapons with meditative care, how he spoke to Gwenhwyvar as an equal rather than a summoned tool. Tauriel became his most frequent companion on patrol, her curiosity overcoming traditional caution. She asked endless questions about the Underdark, about drow society, about his choice to leave. Drizzt found himself speaking of things he'd rarely discussed, the suffocating darkness of Menzoberranzan, his father Zaknafine's secret teachings, the moment he'd understood that power without principle was merely tyranny wearing a crown. "We have legends," Tauriel said one evening as they sat watching sunset paint the western sky in colors the corrupted forest could barely remember. "In of the First Age, when some elves rejected the call of the Valar and remained in Middle-earth. We call them the Morroquendi, the Dark Elves, because they never saw the light of the two trees in Valinor. But they weren't evil, just different, choosing a harder path because it was theirs to choose." "And your people judged them for it?" Drizzt asked. "Some did," she admitted. "The Noldor especially can be proud. They returned from Valinor with great knowledge and power, and sometimes looked down upon those who never left Middle-earth. But the wisest among us understood that courage takes many forms. Perhaps staying to face the darkness requires as much strength as fleeing to the light." Drizzt considered this. "In my world, I fled the darkness to seek light. Here it seems some remained in shadow by choice, and different paths to similar questions. What defines us? Our circumstances or our choices?" "Mithrandir says our choices," Tauriel replied. "That even the smallest person can change the course of the future. I think he'd like you, once he returns from wherever his wanderings have taken him." But it was Galen who delivered the news that changed everything. The captain found Drizzt at dawn, preparing for another patrol. "Riders approach from the south," Galen said, his expression troubled. "Rangers of the Dunedain, led by one called Aragorn, son of Arathorn. They carry news that King Thranduil must hear, and they have requested to meet the dark elf of Mirkwood, whose legend has somehow spread faster than wildfire." Drizzt's eyebrows rose. "Legend? You killed a warg chieftain single-handedly last week," Galen said dryly. "The beast had terrorized our southern border for months. Wood elves gossip, and apparently so do the spiders you slaughter with such efficiency. The ones that escape carry tales of a shadow warrior who hunts in darkness and shows no mercy to evil." The Dunedain heard these tales from captured orcs and became curious. "Should I hide?" Drizzt asked. "If my presence brings complications—" "Too late for that," Galen interrupted. "Besides, Thranduil has decided, if you are to be tested, let it be by many eyes from many peoples. The Dunedain are descendants of Númenor, the greatest kingdom of men. If they judge you fairly, their opinion will carry weight beyond our forest." An hour later, Drizzt stood in Thranduil's throne room as 5 rangers entered, tall men in worn traveling gear, bearing weapons maintained with care and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. Their leader was perhaps 30 years by appearance, though something in his bearing suggested greater age or burden. He had gray eyes and dark hair, a strong face marked by old grief and present determination. When he saw Drizzt, he stopped mid-stride, studying the drow with intense curiosity rather than immediate fear. "Lord Elrond sent word that something strange had occurred in Mirkwood," Aragorn said, his voice a rich baritone carrying authority despite his relatively young appearance. But he did not specify that Thranduil harbored one of the Ullari in flesh form. The dark elf is not a ring wraith, Thranduil said sharply. Whatever else he may be, he lives and breathes and bleeds. He is no undead servant of Sauron. Forgive me, Aragorn said, in approaching Drizzt without apparent fear. I am Aragorn, chieftain of the Dúnedain. We are the Rangers of the North, descended from the ancient kingdom of Arnor. We walk in shadow to guard what most never see, the borders between civilization and wilderness, safety and horror. Then we walk similar paths, Drizzt said, recognizing kinship despite the stranger's initial wariness. I am Drizzt Do'Urden, ranger of Icewind Dale in my own world. I guard borders as well, though mine were between drow evil and surface innocence. Aragorn's eyes widened slightly. Thranduil spoke truth. You are from beyond Middle-earth entirely. Gandalf suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, he trailed off, then seemed to make a decision. We come bearing grave news, my lord Thranduil. The necromancer in Dol Guldur stirs more actively than before. Orc parties have been seen moving north in organized columns as though answering some summons. And there are whispers. He hesitated, glancing at his fellow rangers. Speak, Thranduil commanded. Whispers that the Nine have left Minas Morgul, Aragorn finished. That the Nazgûl ride forth on some errand for their master. Lord Elrond believes Sauron searches for something or someone. The timing of this drow's appearance seems more than coincidence. Drizzt felt cold certainty settle in his gut. The ring called me here. Gandalf said it reached across worlds. If Sauron felt that disturbance, then he knows something significant has occurred, Aragorn agreed grimly. And the Nazgûl are his greatest servants, wraiths bound to the 9 rings of power, slaves to Sauron's will and to the One Ring itself. And if they come to Mirkwood seeking what the ring summoned, they will find me, Drizzt finished. I've become bait in a trap I didn't set. Or, Thranduil mused, an opportunity. If the Nazgûl come here expecting to find a servant of the enemy, they may reveal their master's plans through their actions. We could learn much from observing how Sauron chooses to approach this mystery. You would gamble with my life? Drizzt asked, though there was no accusation in his tone, merely clarification. I would gamble with all our lives, Thranduil replied with brutal honesty. That is kingship in the Third Age. We are all pieces in Sauron's game, whether we will it or not. The question is whether we play passively or actively. Aragorn stepped between them, his posture diplomatic. There may be another option. The Dúnedain have safe houses scattered throughout Eriador. We could escort Drizzt north, away from Dol Guldur's influence. If the Nazgûl search for him here and find nothing, Sauron might conclude the disturbance was a false alarm. Run and hide, Drizzt said flatly. I've tried that strategy. It never works. Evil always finds you eventually. Better to face it on ground of your choosing than flee until cornered. Aragorn smiled slightly, a warrior's smile recognizing a kindred spirit. Spoken like a true ranger. Very well. If you stay, the Dúnedain will stand with you. We have fought the shadow in many forms. We do not flee from darkness. We hunt it. One of Aragorn's companions, a grizzled ranger with scars crossing his weathered face, spoke up. Captain, the Nazgûl are no common enemy. Even armed men quail before their presence. And this drow, skilled as he may be, has fought demon goddesses and undead monstrosities, Drizzt interrupted quietly. I do not claim the Nazgûl will be easy opponents, but I will not flee from them like prey. If they come, let them come. They will find I am not easily broken. The declaration hung in the air, and Drizzt saw something shift in the ranger's expressions. A reassessment, warriors recognizing another who understood that some stands had to be made regardless of odds. Aragorn nodded slowly, respect evident in his gray eyes. Then we make Mirkwood our battlefield, the ranger chieftain said. "Thranduil, will you permit the Dunedain to remain and assist in your forest's defense?" "I will," the Elven King agreed. "And perhaps in the crucible of battle against the Nine, we will learn whether this dark elf serves light or shadow. In the Nazgûl have a way of revealing one's true nature." Tauriel, still standing guard, spoke softly. "What if the ring's call becomes stronger when the Nazgûl approach? They are bound to it, servants of its power. If Drizzt feels the ring's influence even now, being near its most devoted slaves might break me," Drizzt finished for her. "Yes, that's the test, isn't it? Not whether I can kill enemies, but whether I can resist becoming one." Aragorn approached and extended his hand in the manner of surface world warriors. "Then let us hope your resistance is as legendary as your combat skill. The world has enough servants of darkness. What we need are those who stand against it." Drizzt clasped the offered hand, feeling the strength in Aragorn's grip and seeing the old pain in those gray eyes. Pain that spoke of years fighting thankless battles for people who would never know his name. "You understand," Drizzt said softly, "what it means to stand in shadow to protect the light." "Better than most," Aragorn agreed. "The Dunedain are forgotten by those we guard, feared by those who glimpse us in the wild, and hunted by the enemies we track. We are exiles in our own lands, descended from kings but living as wanderers. So yes, Drizzt Do'Urden, I understand." For the first time since arriving in Middle-earth, Drizzt felt the weight of isolation ease slightly. Here was someone who knew loneliness not as occasional hardship but as permanent condition. Someone who chose the harder path because it was right, not because it offered reward. "Oh, how long until the Nazgûl arrive?" Drizzt asked. "Days," one of the other rangers reported. "Perhaps a week at most. They were last seen crossing the Gladden Fields, moving north with purpose." "Then we have time to prepare," Galion said, his tactical mind already working. "Fortify the southern approaches, set scouts in defensive positions, prepare ambush sites." "No," Drizzt interrupted, and when all eyes turned to him, he continued. "Fortifications and ambushes assume we're defending against conventional enemies. The Nazgûl aren't conventional. They're terror weapons designed to break morale before the first blow falls. If we hunker down in fear, we've already lost half the battle." "What do you suggest?" Thranduil asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Drizzt smiled, and it was not a kind expression. I suggest we remember that fear works both ways. The Nazgûl expect to find either servants eager to please or victims paralyzed by terror. Let's show them something they don't expect, hunters who fight back." Aragorn's smile matched Drizzt's. "Now you sound like Gandalf. Very well, Master Drow. Let us plan a welcome for the Nine that they will not soon forget." As the War Council formed, Drizzt felt the old familiar sensation settling over him, the clarity that came before battle, when all questions simplified to survival and victory. But beneath that clarity he felt something else, the faint whisper at the edge of thought, growing stronger with each passing hour. The ring knew the Nazgûl approached, and it was pleased. Drizzt gripped Twinkle's hilt and forced the whisper back into silence. "Not yet," he told the presence. "Not ever, even if I have anything to say about it." But the whisper only laughed, a sound like winter wind through dead trees, and promised that everyone had a breaking point. The game was to find his. The Nazgûl came on the 7th day, and with them came terror that transcended flesh. Drizzt felt their approach before the scouts reported it, a creeping cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the presence of unlife. The forest itself recoiled, trees seeming to lean away from the southern road where shadows moved with purpose against the wind. Animals fled in silent panic, and even the corrupted spiders retreated into their deepest holes. instinct warning them that greater predators walked abroad. In the trees above the old forest road, Drizzt waited with Aragorn and a dozen of their combined forces, wood elves and Dúnedain working together in a fragile alliance forged by necessity. And they had chosen this ground carefully. A stretch where the canopy was thick enough to provide cover but open enough to allow movement, where fallen logs created natural barriers and where the road narrowed between ancient trees whose roots could trip unwary horses. "Remember," Aragorn whispered, his voice barely audible even to elvish ears. "The Nazgûl's greatest weapon is fear itself. They are dangerous warriors, yes, but their true power lies in breaking your will before the fight begins. When they come, you will feel despair. You will believe all hope is lost. You will want to flee or surrender. These feelings are lies. I've faced mind-affecting magic before," Drizzt replied quietly, checking Twinkle and Icing Death one final time. "Drow priestesses use fear and despair as weapons, and the key is recognizing that emotions can lie just as easily as words. The Nazgûl are not Drow priestesses," Galion warned from his position in an adjacent tree. "They are the Nine, kings of men given rings by Sauron in the Second Age, now twisted into undying servants. They have forgotten their names, their loves, everything save their master's will. What comes is not alive in any sense, you understand." Toriel, positioned as a runner to carry messages, added, "Mithrandir once told me that the Nazgûl exist in two worlds simultaneously, the mortal world we see and the wraith world where the ring grants terrible vision. They see not just flesh but spirit, your inner darkness, Drizzt. They will see it clearly." "Then let them see," Drizzt said grimly. "Let them see 200 years of resistance. And let them see every time I chose light over the easy comfort of shadow. If they can read souls, they'll understand I'm not easily turned." But when the Nazgûl finally appeared on the road below, Drizzt understood why generations of men and elves had fled before them. 9 riders mounted on horses that might once have been living creatures but now moved with the jerky animation of corpses, emerged from the southern gloom. Black robes flowed like liquid shadow, hiding any form beneath, if form existed at all. Where faces should be were only darkness deeper than night, voids that seemed to swallow light and hope equally. The air around them shimmered with wrongness, reality itself bending away from their presence. The leader raised one hand, thin and pale as bone, yet with nails like talons, and spoke in a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that bypassed ears to echo directly in the mind. "Where is the one who was called? The ring summoned across the void. Where is the dark elf who bears the shadow within?" Drizzt felt the voice like physical pressure, pushing against his thoughts and demanding surrender. Beside him, one of the younger rangers whimpered despite himself, and even Galion's face had gone gray with supernatural dread. Only Aragorn seemed unaffected, though lines of strain around his eyes suggested this cost him dearly. "Now," Aragorn whispered. Arrows flew from a dozen positions simultaneously, elvish precision combining with ranger pragmatism to create a deadly storm. Most shafts struck true, but where they hit robes they passed through without resistance, yet as if the Nazgûl wore no more substance than smoke. 2 arrows found the horses, however, and the corrupted beasts shrieked in voices that had never come from any natural animal. The Nazgûl's response was immediate and devastating. All 9 raised their hands in unison, and a wave of despair rolled outward like tsunami made of pure hopelessness. Drizzt felt it crash over him. Visions of failure, images of Menzoberranzan's triumph, memories of every time someone had looked at him with fear or hatred. The whisper that had haunted him for weeks suddenly roared into a scream. "Surrender. Accept. You are what they think you are. Stop fighting and embrace the darkness that defines you." For a heartbeat, Drizzt teetered on the edge of yielding. 2 centuries of struggle seemed suddenly pointless, a child's stubborn refusal to accept obvious truth, when what was he but a drow pretending to be something better? What were his principles but pretty lies to mask the killer he'd been born to be? Then he thought of Zaknafein, his father by choice, not blood, who had fought Lolth's evil for centuries longer than Drizzt had lived. Zaknafein, who had given his life to save his son's principles. If his father could resist for so long against greater odds, who was Drizzt to surrender now? The scream became a whisper again. The despair receded to background noise, and Drizzt Do'Urden opened his eyes to find the Nazgûl searching the trees with eyeless gazes. "There," the leader said, pointing directly at Drizzt's position. "The one who resists, the one the ring called. You bear darkness but reject the master of shadows. This is heresy against the natural order." Drizzt dropped from the tree in a controlled fall, Twinkle and Icing Death already singing through the air. He hit the ground rolling and came up running, not toward the Nazgûl but past them, drawing their attention away from the frozen rangers and elves, still struggling against the wave of terror. "If I'm such heresy," Drizzt called out, "then come teach me the error of my ways." 3 Nazgûl spurred their undead horses forward with inhuman speed, black blades appearing in their hands, swords that seemed to drink light and radiate cold. Drizzt waited until the last possible moment, then activated his innate drow magic. Darkness exploded around him, a sphere of absolute black that even Nazgûl's sight couldn't penetrate. He heard their confusion, felt them lose track of him in the void he'd created, but Drizzt could see perfectly in his own darkness. He flowed between the Nazgûl like shadow made flesh, Twinkle's blade finding the joint between one wraith's gauntlet and robe. The enchanted scimitar bit deep, and for the first time the Nazgûl shrieked in pain, a sound that shattered the supernatural despair long enough for the ambushers to regain their senses. Arrows flew again, and this time Aragorn dropped from the trees with his sword drawn, the blade gleaming with elvish starlight. "The blades!" Aragorn shouted. "Strike only where the robes meet their weapons or armor. The wraiths themselves are formless, but their tools are material." Drizzt understood immediately. The Nazgûl were spirits bound to the ring, existing mostly in the wraith world, but their weapons and accoutrements were real. Disable those, and you disabled the wraith, at least temporarily. He shifted his tactics, Icing Death's frost magic shattering one Nazgûl's blade while Twinkle carved through the reins of another's corrupted horse. The battle became chaos, wood elves and rangers coordinating attacks while Drizzt served as mobile disruption, his speed and dark vision allowing him to strike from unexpected angles. The Nazgûl fought with centuries of experience, but they were accustomed to opponents who broke before their terror. Drizzt had been terrified his entire life and learned to function through it. Fear was background noise, familiar as breathing. One Nazgûl cornered him against an ancient oak, its blade descending in a strike that promised not just death, but soul destruction. Drizzt rolled beneath the blow and came up with Icing Death pointed at the wraith's core, and the Frostbrand scimitar unleashed its magic directly into the darkness beneath the robes, and the Nazgûl staggered backward, ice forming on its clothes as though the cold affected whatever essence animated it. "You resist the ring's call," the creature hissed, sounding almost confused. "You bear shadow but serve light. This should not be. You are contradiction, aberration. The master will make you whole." "I am already whole," Drizzt snarled, pressing his advantage. "Your master offers slavery disguised as strength. I've heard that song before. The answer is still no." But even as he fought, Drizzt felt the ring's whisper growing louder. The Nazgûl's proximity intensified its call, as Tauriel had warned. Images flooded his mind, visions of himself standing at Sauron's right hand, in using the ring's power to return to Menzoberranzan and destroy Lolth's priestesses to force the Drow to accept him, to make everyone who'd ever feared or rejected him kneel in recognition of his worth. The visions were seductive precisely because they touched real desires: to be accepted, to protect those he loved, to end the loneliness that had defined his existence. "No," he whispered, then louder. "No!" Twinkle blazed with sudden brilliance, as though the blade sensed its wielder's struggle and offered its own form of assistance. The light drove back the Nazgûl's darkness, and in that moment of clarity Aragorn's sword found the Wraith leader's crown, shattering the iron circlet that anchored the creature to physical form. The Nazgûl dissolved with a scream that echoed across dimensions, its essence fleeing back to Mordor to reform. The remaining 8 Nazgûl retreated with eerie coordination, recognizing that this battle was not proceeding as expected. Their horses, 3 now riderless and wandering in confusion, wheeled away from the continued arrow fire. "The Dark Elf has chosen," the remaining leader declared, its voice carrying grim finality. "The Master will remember. When the ring returns to its lord, when the shadow covers all lands, you will stand before the Dark Tower and beg for the mercy of slavery you now reject." Then they were gone, melting into shadow as though they'd never existed, leaving only the corrupted horses now freed from their riders and collapsing into final death, and the smell of ancient evil lingering in the air. Silence fell over the forest road. Slowly, the rangers and elves emerged from their positions, expressions mixing relief, an exhaustion, and something approaching awe. They looked at Drizzt as though seeing him clearly for the first time, not as potential threat, but as warrior who had stood against the Nine and survived. Aragorn approached, breathing hard, his sword still gleaming with residual starlight. "You heard the ring's call in the middle of combat," he said quietly. "I saw you wavering, but you pushed it back." "Barely," Drizzt admitted, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "It's getting stronger. Being near the Nazgûl." He trailed off, unable to articulate how close he'd come to surrender. "But you didn't surrender," Tauriel said, and there was wonder in her voice. "The Nazgûl were kings before they fell to the ring's power. Great men who thought they could control the gifts Sauron offered. All of them failed. But you, a warrior who admits bearing inner darkness, you resisted." Galion cleaned an arrow thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's precisely why he resisted. The Nine believed themselves above corruption. Drizzt knows he's vulnerable, so he guards against it. Humility, ironically, may be the best defense against the ring's pride." Drizzt wasn't sure he agreed with that assessment, but he was too exhausted to argue. The battle had lasted perhaps 10 minutes, but he felt as though he'd fought for hours. Resisting the Nazgûl's despair and the ring's promises simultaneously had drained him in ways physical combat never could. "We should return to the Woodland Realm," Aragorn decided. "The Nazgûl will report to Sauron that you resist his call. That makes you a threat. If the enemy does not tolerate threats, he destroys them." "Let him try," Drizzt said with more confidence than he felt. But as they began the trek back through Mirkwood, Drizzt felt the whisper still there, patient and persistent. "Soon you will understand. The fight cannot be won, but it can be ended. Accept what you are, accept what I offer, rest." And the terrible thing was, part of him wanted to listen. Word of the Nazgûl's retreat spread through the Woodland Realm like wildfire through dry timber. And with it came a shift in how the Wood Elves regarded their dark-skinned guest. Drizzt sensed the change immediately. Guards who had watched him with suspicion now nodded in wary respect. Scouts who had kept their distance sought his advice on ambush tactics, and even Thranduil's coldness thawed to something approaching acknowledgement. But it was the summons to Rivendell that changed everything. "Lord Elrond requests your presence," Gandalf announced, appearing in Thranduil's throne room as though materializing from smoke and starlight. The wizard looked travel-worn but energized, his eyes bright with the intensity of one who had discovered something important. "The ring has been found." The words fell into shocked silence. Drizzt felt the whisper in his mind suddenly surge, a tide of malevolent joy that nearly drove him to his knees. Across the room, Aragorn went pale, and Thranduil rose from his throne with an expression that mixed hope and dread in equal measure. "Where?" the Elven King demanded. "After all these years, after Isildur failed to destroy it at the mountain's fire, after centuries of searching, where?" "The Shire," Gandalf replied, and there was both wonder and concern in his voice. "A hobbit named Bilbo Baggins possessed it for 60 years without understanding what he carried. He has now passed it to his nephew Frodo, and I have confirmed beyond doubt that this is the One Ring of Sauron. Elrond calls a council to determine what must be done." "Destroy it," Drizzt said immediately, the words coming from instinct deeper than thought. Whatever it takes, whatever the cost, it must be destroyed." Gandalf's gaze fixed on him with penetrating intensity. "You speak from personal experience, I think. The ring has called to you, hasn't it? Tried to seduce you since your arrival in Middle-earth." "Every moment of every day," Drizzt admitted, seeing no point in hiding what must be obvious to the wizard's perception. "It promises everything I've ever wanted. Acceptance, power to protect those I love, an end to being judged for my heritage. And the truly terrible thing is, it makes those promises in my own voice, using my own thoughts until I can barely distinguish its corruption from my own legitimate desires. That," Gandalf said gravely, "is why you must come to Rivendell. The council must include all who might resist the ring's power, but also those who have already felt its call and withstood it. Your perspective, one who knows temptation intimately but chooses resistance, may prove invaluable." Thranduil interjected, "To bring him before the assembled wise of Middle-earth is to invite controversy. Many who gather will see only his appearance and assume evil. Then they will learn to see more clearly," Gandalf replied with steel in his voice. "I did not walk Middle-earth for 3,000 years to watch us destroy ourselves through prejudice when the true enemy stands at our gates. If the Eldar cannot distinguish between the appearance of evil and its reality, we deserve to fall." Aragorn stepped forward. "I will vouch for him. The Nazgûl attacked in force and Drizzt stood against them. More, he heard the ring's strongest call in the midst of combat and still fought for us, not for Sauron. That proves more than 1,000 words of character." "The Dúnedain support him?" Thranduil asked, something shifting in his calculation. The Rangers of the North carried weight beyond their diminished numbers, being heirs to ancient Númenor's nobility. "We do," Aragorn confirmed. "He is one of us, a ranger who walks in shadow to guard the light. I have fought beside princes and kings in my years, and I would trust this drow at my back as readily as any." Tauriel, standing at her post, added quietly, "He saved my life, showed mercy when our kind showed him only suspicion. I would walk beside him as well." Galen, ever pragmatic, said, "The tactical benefits of his combat skills aside, he has proven resistant to the ring's direct influence. That is rare. If we are to form a company to deal with this threat, having one who can recognize and resist corruption would be valuable." Drizzt felt something warm and unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Acceptance, earned through deed rather than given through obligation. It was a feeling he'd experienced before with the companions of the Hall, but never from an entire community. "I will go to Rivendell," he said. "Though I warn you, the closer I get to the ring itself, the stronger its call will become. I don't know if my resistance will hold." None of us know, Gandalf replied. That is what makes resistance meaningful. It is chosen moment by moment despite uncertainty. But I believe you have more strength than you credit yourself. Even the ring sought to draw you to Middle-earth as a tool. Instead, it has brought here a warrior who understands exactly how corruption works. Sauron has made a grave error. Or, Drizzt countered, the ring is patient and plays a longer game than we can see. Perhaps my resistance now is simply making my eventual fall more useful to the enemy. Dark thoughts, Gandalf observed. Realistic thoughts, Drizzt corrected. I've seen how Lolth worked, allowing her victims to believe they had free will, even encouraging their rebellion because it made them more useful when she finally revealed the trap. The ring may be doing the same. Then we must ensure there is no trap, Aragorn said firmly. And the way to do that is through fellowship. You will not face this alone. Yet we will watch for signs of corruption and hold you accountable. The journey to Rivendell took 3 weeks, traveling through lands that showed Drizzt the breadth of Middle-earth's beauty and danger. They passed through the ruins of ancient kingdoms, crossed rivers that had flowed since the world's shaping, and camped beneath stars that had watched the First Age burn. Gandalf proved to be excellent company when he chose to speak, sharing stories of Middle-earth's history that made Drizzt understand the weight of ages pressing down on this world. But it was the quiet conversations with Aragorn during night watches that illuminated the Ranger Chieftain's character. Drizzt learned that this man was Isildur's heir, descended from the very king who had failed to destroy the ring millennia ago, when that Aragorn bore the weight of his ancestors' failure with grim determination to do better, to be better than those who came before. I understand something of your burden, Aragorn admitted one night, the two of them watching stars wheel overhead. To be judged for ancestors' sins, to carry the weight of history's failures. The line of Elendil is fallen, our kingdom lost, our people scattered. I am heir to nothing but responsibility and the expectation that I will fail as Isildur failed. But you keep fighting, Drizzt observed. As do you, Aragorn replied. We are both exiles from our birthrights. You from Menzoberranzan, I from the throne of Gondor. We both bear darkness in our lineage, and we both choose daily to be more than our inheritance demands. The difference, Drizzt said quietly, is that you could reclaim your throne if you proved worthy. I will never be welcomed in Menzoberranzan without becoming the evil I rejected. Perhaps, Aragorn agreed. Or perhaps you have already found your true home. Not in any city or kingdom, but in the choice itself. Some of us are meant to wander, to belong not to places, but to principles. The words resonated with truth Drizzt had been circling for years. He thought of the companions of the Hall, Bruenor, Catti-brie, Wulfgar Regis, who had become his family not through blood, but through shared struggle and mutual respect. Perhaps Middle-earth could offer the same if he survived the coming trials. Rivendell appeared as the sun set on the 21st day of travel, and Drizzt's breath caught at the sight. And the last homely house was built into the landscape with such organic grace that it seemed less constructed than grown, waterfalls and architecture merging into something that transcended both. Elves moved through the grounds with timeless serenity, and the air itself thrummed with ancient magic. But it was the presence waiting in the central courtyard that made Drizzt stop in his tracks. Lord Elrond stood tall and ageless, bearing the weight of thousands of years, with the grace of one who had witnessed the world's shaping and refused to despair at its breaking. Beside him stood Arwen, his daughter, whose beauty made even stars seem dim by comparison. And gathered around them were representatives of all the free peoples, dwarves, men, elves from different kingdoms, and even a few hobbits who stared at Drizzt with wide-eyed wonder. Welcome to Rivendell, Drizzt Do'Urden, Elrond said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested power deeper than magic. You stand in the house of Elrond, son of Arendil. Here you will find sanctuary, wisdom, and, if the Valar are kind, answers to the questions that have haunted you since your arrival in our world." Drizzt bowed respectfully, aware that every eye was upon him and that many of those eyes held suspicion. "I thank you for your hospitality, Lord Elrond, though I suspect my presence has caused considerable debate." "Indeed it has." A dwarf stepped forward, his beard magnificent and his eyes fierce. "I am Glóin, son of Groen of the line of Durin. I was there when Bilbo Baggins found the ring in the goblin caves beneath the Misty Mountains. I have traveled far to be part of this council, and I would know. What is a creature of shadow and darkness doing in the heart of the Eldar's greatest stronghold?" Before Drizzt could answer, another voice rang out, clear and strong with the authority of one accustomed to command. A tall man stepped forward, bearing himself with princely pride, though his eyes held shadows of their own. "I am Boromir, son of Denethor, steward of Gondor. My city stands as bulwark against Mordor's darkness. We know the enemy's servants well. This drow claims to resist Sauron, but how can one who bears the mark of shadow fight against it? Is it not more likely he serves the enemy's purpose even now, whether he knows it or not?" The accusations hung in the air, and Drizzt felt the familiar weight of judgment descending. But before the situation could deteriorate, in Gandalf's staff struck the courtyard stones with a crack like thunder. "Enough!" the wizard commanded, and power radiated from him, not threatening but undeniable. "I have walked Middle-earth since before the sun was made. I have looked into the eye of Sauron and faced the Balrog in the deeps of Khazad-dûm. I know evil in all its forms, and I tell you now, this drow is not your enemy." "Then who is he?" demanded another elf, tall and proud with hair like golden sunlight. "I am Legolas, son of Thranduil. My father sent word that this stranger fought beside our warriors, but also that the Nazgûl sought him specifically. The Nine do not hunt those who serve the light. They hunt threats to their master, or potential servants." "They hunted him," Aragorn interjected, stepping forward to stand beside Drizzt, "because the ring called him here from beyond Middle-earth itself, hoping to use him. But he resisted. I fought beside him when the Nazgûl attacked. He heard the ring's strongest call and still stood with us, not against us." "Words," Boromir declared. "Any servant of the enemy would claim resistance. How do we know this is not elaborate deception?" Elrond raised his hand and silence fell like a curtain. "These are questions for the council, which convenes at dawn. Tonight, Drizzt Do'Urden is a guest in my house under my protection. Any who would challenge that protection challenges me." The threat was subtle but absolute. No one spoke against it. That night, as Drizzt stood on a balcony overlooking Rivendell's waterfalls, he felt the whisper louder than ever before. The ring was here, somewhere in these halls, and its presence called to him like gravity pulling water downhill. It would be so easy, the voice suggested, to simply find the ring, to look upon it, to understand what all this fear and discussion was about. Not to take it, just to see it. To prove to himself that he could resist even when holding ultimate power. "No," Drizzt whispered into the night. "Not even to look, especially not to look." "Wise," said a voice behind him. Drizzt turned to find a small figure, a hobbit barely 3.5 feet tall, with curly dark hair and eyes that held more burden than any halfling should carry. "I'm Frodo Baggins. The ring is mine to bear, though I wish it were not." Drizzt studied the hobbit with new understanding. "You feel it too, the constant whisper, the promises, the slow erosion of will." "Every moment," Frodo admitted, her touching his chest where something hung beneath his shirt. something that radiated malice like heat from forge fire. "But Gandalf says you've resisted it since you arrived, that you understand how corruption works. I could use advice from someone who knows this battle." Looking at the small, brave hobbit carrying a burden that would break most warriors, Drizzt felt something crystallize in his mind. This was why he'd been brought here, not as a tool for Sauron's plans, but as someone who could help those who bore the true weight of resistance. "The first rule," Drizzt said softly, "is never believe you can control it. The moment you think you're strong enough to handle the corruption safely, you've already lost." Frodo nodded slowly. "And the second rule?" "Never face it alone," Drizzt replied. "Corruption thrives in isolation. Now surround yourself with those who know your true self, who can see when you're compromised." "Will you be one of those people?" Frodo asked simply. "Will you help me resist?" Drizzt looked at the hobbit, this small, unlikely hero who carried the fate of the world, and made a choice that would define everything to come. "Yes," he said, "I will stand with you, Frodo Baggins, until the ring is destroyed or we both fall trying." And in making that promise, Drizzt Do'Urden became part of something greater than himself. A fellowship not yet formed, dedicated to a quest not yet declared in service of a hope that seemed impossible. The Council of Elrond would convene at dawn, and the fate of Middle-earth would be decided. But tonight, on a balcony in Rivendell, a drow ranger and a hobbit ring-bearer made their own quiet pact. To resist, to endure, and to prove that evil, no matter how ancient or powerful, could be defeated by those who refused to surrender. The whisper raged in Drizzt's mind, furious at the alliance. He smiled into the darkness and held firm. Dawn broke over Rivendell with the kind of crystalline clarity that seemed impossible in mortal lands, as though the light itself had been refined to essential purity. Drizzt stood in the courtyard where the council would convene, watching the representatives of the free peoples gather in a great circle of stone seats. The atmosphere thrummed with tension, not hostility precisely, but the wariness of those who understood that the decisions made today would echo through ages. Elrond took his seat at the circle's head, his presence commanding without demanding. To his right sat Gandalf, staff resting across his knees and eyes sharp despite the wizard's apparent age. Aragorn sat among the rangers, though Drizzt noticed how Elrond's gaze lingered on the man with something approaching paternal concern. The dwarves occupied one section, led by Glóin and his son Gimli, a fierce-looking warrior whose beard was braided with obvious pride. Legolas represented the woodland realm alongside two other elves from distant kingdoms, their bearing suggesting nobility and long memory. Boromir sat with several men of Gondor, his hand never far from his sword's hilt, eyes constantly assessing threats. And in a seat that seemed too large for him, Frodo Baggins sat with three other hobbits, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, who regarded the assembled might of Middle-earth with wonder and apprehension. Drizzt stood rather than sat, positioned where he could see all entrances. Old habits from the Underdark, where sitting meant vulnerability. Several attendees noted this with expressions ranging from understanding to suspicion. "We are met here to decide the fate of the One Ring," Elrond began, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard without being raised. "Long has it been hidden, but hidden things have a way of revealing themselves when the world's need is greatest, or when darkness grows bold enough to seek them openly. Frodo, will you show the council what we face?" The hobbit stood on trembling legs and drew from beneath his shirt a chain holding a simple gold band. The ring seemed unremarkable at first glance. Just metal formed in a circle, no jewels or obvious craftsmanship. But as it caught the morning light, Drizzt felt the whisper explode into a roar. "Take me, claim me, With my power, you could return to Menzoberranzan as a conqueror, make them kneel, make them accept you, end the loneliness, end the struggle, take me and be free. Drizzt's hand moved toward his belt before conscious thought, and only Aragorn's subtle shift, positioning himself between Drizzt and Frodo, broke the compulsion. The drow warrior forced his hand back to Twinkle's hilt, gripping the familiar leather to anchor himself to reality. Around the circle, every person reacted. Boromir's eyes glazed with desire, his breathing quickening. The dwarves muttered among themselves, and Gimli's hands clenched into fists. Even the elves, ancient and wise, leaned forward slightly as though drawn by invisible threads. Only Gandalf and Elrond seemed unaffected, though lines of strain around their eyes suggested this cost them dearly. "You see," Elrond said quietly as Frodo concealed the ring again, and the assembled company seemed to exhale collectively. "The ring shows itself to all who might serve its purpose, and it whispers to each according to their nature, promising power to the strong, safety to the fearful, justice to the wronged. But all its promises lead to the same end: slavery to Sauron's will." "Then destroy it," Gimli declared, standing with the blunt practicality of his people. "Melt it down, shatter it, unmake it. Why do we sit here debating when the answer is obvious?" "Because," Gandalf said wearily, "the ring cannot be destroyed by any craft we possess. It was made in the fires of Mount Doom, and only in those fires can it be unmade. To destroy the ring, someone must carry it into the heart of Mordor itself, into Sauron's own land, and cast it into the cracks of doom." Silence fell like stone into deep water. "That's suicide," one of the Gondorian men said flatly. "Mordor is a fortress. The Black Gate is impassable. Even if someone could enter, Sauron would sense the ring's presence immediately. No one could reach Mount Doom alive." "Yet it must be attempted," Elrond replied. "The alternative is to allow Sauron to reclaim the ring and achieve dominion over all Middle-earth. Every kingdom would fall. Every free person would become a slave. The choice is between a quest that seems impossible and a future that is intolerable." Boromir stood, and Drizzt immediately recognized the gleam in the man's eyes. He'd seen it before in those seduced by power's promise. "There is another option," the Gondorian captain said. "Use the ring. Wield its power against Sauron. With the ring, we could command armies that would make the enemy tremble. Gondor could rise to its former glory. We could defeat Mordor in open battle rather than skulk into its lands like thieves." "The ring cannot be used," Gandalf said sharply. "It is Sauron's creation, bound to his will. Any who wield it will become his servant, whether they intend to or not. The greater your strength, the faster you fall. Boromir, you speak of using the ring to protect Gondor, but you would destroy everything you seek to save." "You speak from fear," Boromir countered. "From the caution of those who have lived too long and forgotten what it means to fight. My city bleeds daily, holding back Mordor's tide. We need weapons, not platitudes about corruption. If the ring offers power, then it offers lies," Drizzt interrupted, his voice cutting through Boromir's passion like twinkle through spider silk. All eyes turned to him, and he felt the weight of judgment again, but also the weight of experience that demanded he speak. "I have heard the ring's promises, Captain Boromir. It whispers to me constantly, offering everything I've ever wanted. And I know exactly how this kind of corruption works because I was raised in it." He stepped into the circle's center, addressing the entire council. "In Menzoberranzan, the drow city where I was born, we served a demon goddess named Lolth. She promised power to those who embraced cruelty, strength to those who showed no mercy. The entire civilization was built on those promises, and for thousands of years, the drow believed they were powerful. They weren't. They were slaves wearing crowns, prisoners who mistook their cells for palaces. "Your city is not Middle-earth," Boromir argued, and though his voice had lost some certainty. "No," Drizzt agreed, "but evil is evil regardless of geography. The ring's promises are Lolth's promises with different words. It will tell you that you're special, that you're strong enough to control it, that you can wield its power for good. And when you believe those lies, it will twist you into exactly the monster you thought you were fighting." Gandalf's eyes gleamed with approval. "Spoken from hard experience. The ring corrupts through pride, by making you believe you are the exception to every rule, the one person strong enough to master it. But there are no exceptions. Even I dare not touch it, for I know my desire to do good would become the very path of my damnation." "Then we are doomed," said one of the elves from Lothlorien, her voice like silver bells morning. "If the ring cannot be destroyed and cannot be used, what hope remains?" "The hope," Frodo said quietly, standing again with visible effort, "that someone can carry it to Mount Doom before being corrupted. Someone the ring underestimates. Someone small and overlooked." He took a shaking breath. "I will take the ring to Mordor, though I do not know the way." The declaration hung in the air like a sword balanced on its point. This small hobbit, barely more than a child by the standards of the assembled immortals and warriors, volunteered for a quest that terrified them all. "You cannot go alone," Sam declared, standing beside his master with fierce loyalty. "I'm going with you, Mr. Frodo. You'll need someone to carry supplies and make sure you eat proper meals. And you'll need fighters," Aragorn added, it rising with the fluid grace of a ranger king. "I will go with you, Frodo. The line of Elendil has failed before. We will not fail again. Nor will the dwarves be absent from this quest," Gimli announced, standing with his axe across his shoulders. "If there are orcs between here and Mount Doom, they'll need killing. And no one kills orcs better than the sons of Durin. You will need eyes that can see far," Legolas said, joining the growing company, "and a bow that never misses. The elves will walk this road with you." Gandalf simply nodded as though his participation had never been in question. Drizzt felt the moment crystallizing. This was the fellowship Gandalf had spoken of, the bonds that would allow resistance to the ring's power. And as he looked at Frodo, bearing his terrible burden with hobbit courage, he knew his own choice was already made. "I will go as well," Drizzt said. "I know the ring's corruption intimately. I can recognize when it begins to influence the company, and I can fight in darkness, which I suspect we'll face in abundance." "A dweller in shadow to fight the shadow," Elrond mused. "There is poetry in that, and perhaps providence. But Drizzt Do'Urden, you must understand, this quest will test your resistance as nothing has before. The closer you get to Mordor, the stronger the ring's call will become. Can you truly withstand it to the very end?" "I don't know," Drizzt admitted with brutal honesty. "But I know I must try. Because if I fled from every test I wasn't certain I could pass, I would never have left Menzoberranzan. And sometimes you have to walk the uncertain path and trust that your principles will hold." Boromir looked at the assembling company with an expression mixing frustration and grudging respect. "Then I too will join, if you'll have me. Gondor has bled for generations holding back the darkness. If there's a chance to end the threat forever, I must be part of it. Though I still believe we could use the ring's power." "That belief," Gandalf said gently, "is precisely why you must come. So that when the ring whispers its promises, there are others present to remind you of truth. Corruption thrives in isolation. Fellowship defeats it." 9 companions, Elrond observed. 9 to stand against the 9 Nazgûl. There is symmetry in that and perhaps more. You will be the Fellowship of the Ring, sworn to see this quest through to whatever end awaits. But know this, the road will be hard beyond imagining. Many of you may not return, and even those who survive may be forever changed. Then we will change together, Aragorn said, and there was steel in his voice, the sound of a king who had not yet claimed his crown. And we will do what Isildur could not. We will see the ring destroyed, or die in the attempt. The company looked at each other, elf and dwarf, wizard and ranger, hobbits and men, and a drow who had traveled across realities to be here. They were an impossible fellowship, drawn from disparate peoples who had spent ages in suspicion or conflict. But they shared one thing: the willingness to stand against darkness, even when victory seemed beyond hope. Then it is decided, Elrond declared. The Fellowship of the Ring will depart when preparations are complete. May the valor guide your steps, and may the courage you show today echo through all the ages of Middle-earth. As the council dispersed to make ready, Drizzt found himself approached by Boromir. The Gondorian captain studied him with complicated expression, part challenge, part reluctant respect. "I still don't trust you," Boromir said bluntly. "You wear the face of the enemy and speak of corruption as though intimately familiar with it. But Aragorn vouches for you and Gandalf seems convinced, so I will watch you, drow. And if you falter, if the ring's influence takes you, you'll kill me," Drizzt finished calmly. "I would expect nothing less. In fact, I'm counting on it. Watch me closely, Boromir of Gondor, because I know myself well enough to understand that resistance isn't guaranteed. If I fall, and someone needs to end me before I can cause harm." Boromir blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. "You admit you might fail?" "I admit I'm mortal and fallible," Drizzt replied. "Acknowledging weakness isn't surrender, it's the first step toward preventing it from becoming reality. You should try it sometime. Your conviction that you could wield the ring safely? That's the very pride that will destroy you if you don't guard against it." The Gondorian's face darkened with anger, but before he could respond, Gandalf interposed himself between them with the timing of one who had prevented countless conflicts. "Peace, both of you," the wizard said. "You will have weeks of travel ahead to either learn to trust each other or confirm your suspicions. Use that time wisely. The Fellowship cannot afford internal division." As Boromir stalked away, Gandalf turned to Drizzt with an appraising look. "You made an enemy there." "No," Drizzt corrected. "I made him aware that I see his vulnerability. He'll hate me for it now, but if he survives, he might thank me later. Or he might prove you right and fall to the ring's influence," Gandalf observed. "Boromir is brave and noble, but he carries Gondor's weight on his shoulders. The ring will promise him the power to save his city, and he will want desperately to believe it. Then we watch him," Drizzt said simply, "as he'll watch me. As we must all watch each other." Gandalf smiled, though there was sadness in it. "You understand Fellowship better than most who have lived their entire lives in Middle-earth, and perhaps that's what makes you invaluable. You know that resistance is collective work, not individual heroism." The wizard paused, then asked the question Drizzt had been dreading. "But what happens when we reach Mordor itself? When the ring is close to its source of power and the whispers become screams, will your resistance hold?" Drizzt looked toward the mountains in the east, toward the distant darkness where Mordor festered like a wound in the world's flesh. He felt the pull even now, a malevolent gravity drawing him toward doom or destiny. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'll face that moment when it comes. Until then, I keep walking forward, one step at a time, one choice at a time. That's all any of us can do." "Sometimes," Gandalf said softly, "that is enough." The fellowship departed Rivendell on a gray morning when clouds hung low over the mountains, and the Bruinen River sang songs of ancient journeys. They traveled first through peaceful lands, past the ruins of Arnor and into the wild country where Aragorn's rangers had walked for generations. These early days allowed the company to learn each other's rhythms. Legolas's unearthly grace and keen sight, Gimli's stubborn strength and unexpected wisdom, Boromir's martial prowess and growing obsession, the Hobbit's resilience and surprising courage, and Drizzt, who moved through their formation like shadow made purposeful, his violet eyes constantly scanning for threats while his scimitars remained loose in their sheaths. The others watched him with varying degrees of trust, Aragorn with fellowship, Gandalf with measured hope, Legolas with curious respect, Gimli with dwarven suspicion softening to grudging approval, Boromir with naked distrust, and the hobbits with wonder that someone who looked so dangerous could be so careful with his strength. But it was at night, when the company made camp and the ring's whispers grew louder in the darkness, that Drizzt's true value emerged. He could sense when the ring began influencing the company's thoughts, recognizing the subtle shifts in tone that indicated corruption rather than legitimate concern. Twice he warned Gandalf that Boromir was spending too much time near Frodo, staring at the ring's hiding place with hunger in his eyes. 3 times he gently redirected conversations that were veering toward arguments about using the ring's power. You have a gift for this," Aragorn observed one night as they stood watch together, the rest of the company sleeping. "Recognizing corruption before it takes root." "It's not a gift," Drizzt replied quietly. "It's scar tissue. I've heard these whispers so many times from Lolth, from the matron mothers of Menzoberranzan, from my own doubts and fears, that I recognize the pattern. The ring uses the same techniques: isolation, pride, fear, desire. If you know the tools, you can see when they're being employed. And yet knowing doesn't make you immune," Aragorn said. It wasn't a question. "No," Drizzt admitted. "Every day the whispers grow stronger. Every mile closer to Mordor makes resistance harder. I feel the ring promising me acceptance, power, and end to exile. And the terrible thing is, I want those things. I've wanted them my entire life. But you don't take them. Because I know the price," Drizzt said. "Acceptance bought through domination isn't real. Power gained through corruption destroys what it claims to protect. I learned that lesson in blood and pain over 2 centuries. The ring offers everything I've already rejected, just wearing a different mask." Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by Boromir's watch relief, and Drizzt didn't miss how the Gondorian's eyes tracked Frodo's sleeping form, or how his hand trembled slightly when the hobbit shifted and the ring caught moonlight beneath his shirt. The moment of crisis came at Amon Hen. They had traveled for weeks, passing through increasingly dangerous lands. The company had survived Caradhras' snows. He delved into the darkness of Moria, where Drizzt's dark vision and Underdark experience proved invaluable navigating the ancient dwarven halls, and emerged in Lothlorien, where the Lady Galadriel had tested them all and found Drizzt worthy despite his appearance. The Golden Wood had been respite, but also revelation. Galadriel herself had been tempted by the ring and rejected it, proving that even the mightiest could choose resistance. But now, on the shores of Nen Hithul, with Mordor's shadow growing stronger with each passing hour, the fellowship fractured. Drizzt felt it before it happened. A surge in the ring's malevolent presence, a shift in the corruption's pressure. He turned from gathering firewood to see Boromir following Frodo into the woods, and every instinct screamed warning. "Aragorn!" he called, already running. "The ring moves against us." They found Boromir cornering Frodo among ancient ruins, the Gondorian captain's face twisted with desire and noble conviction warring for dominance. Give me the ring, Boromir pleaded, hands outstretched. I will use it to save my people. Please, Frodo, you don't understand the burden Gondor carries. With the ring, I could end the war, protect everyone. Just let me... No! Frodo backed away, hand clutching the ring beneath his shirt, and Drizzt saw the exact moment when Boromir's need overwhelmed his judgment. The captain lunged. Drizzt moved faster, Twinkle blocking Boromir's grab with the flat of the blade while Icing Death came up in a defensive position. "Stop!" the drow commanded. "Listen to yourself, Boromir. The ring speaks through your voice. This isn't you. Get out of my way." "A dark elf," Boromir snarled and drew his sword. "You've been corrupted since you arrived. Of course you'd defend the ring. You want it for yourself." The accusation stung because part of it was true. Drizzt did want the ring, felt its pull like gravity, dreamed of its power every night. But wanting and taking were different choices. "I do want it," Drizzt admitted, not lowering his guard as Aragorn and the others arrived. "Every moment of every day I want it. But wanting doesn't make taking right. You taught me that, Boromir. Back in Rivendell when you spoke of protecting Gondor. This isn't protection, this is surrender disguised as strength." Boromir's sword wavered and Drizzt saw tears streaming down the captain's face, the terrible recognition of what he'd almost become. I tried to take it. The ring. I tried to take it from Frodo." His voice broke. "What have I done?" "What the ring wanted you to do," Gandalf said grimly, arriving with staff blazing. "But you stopped before the final step. There is still time for redemption, Boromir of Gondor. But only if you choose it." The captain fell to his knees, sword clattering to stone. "Forgive me, Frodo. Forgive me." But Frodo was already backing away, the ring's influence whispering that the entire fellowship was compromised, that he could only trust himself. Drizzt saw the terror in the hobbit's eyes, the realization that even the strongest among them could fall. "Frodo, wait!" Drizzt called, but the hobbit was running, and in the chaos of Boromir's breakdown he disappeared into the ruins. The fellowship splintered in moments. Merry and Pippin were captured by Uruk-hai, drawn by the commotion. Sam chased after Frodo with absolute loyalty. Boromir, trying to redeem himself, stood against the orc horde to buy the hobbits time and was struck by multiple arrows. Still fighting, still protecting, still trying to be worthy of the second chance he'd been given. Drizzt found him dying among the ruins, holding off the last orcs with failing strength. The drow's scimitars ended the enemy with brutal efficiency, but Boromir's wounds were mortal. "I failed," the captain whispered as Drizzt knelt beside him. "The ring, it showed me what I wanted most, and I reached for it." "But you stopped," Drizzt said fiercely, gripping Boromir's hand. "You heard truth through corruption's lies. That's not failure, that's victory. Many who face the ring fall completely. You stepped back from the edge." "Did I?" Boromir's laugh was wet with blood. "I drove Frodo away, broke the fellowship because I thought I was strong enough to control what cannot be controlled," Drizzt finished. "I know that trap intimately. But listen to me, Boromir. Your failure today will save others. Because now everyone knows, even the noblest can fall. Even the strongest can be tempted. That knowledge will make them more cautious, more vigilant. Your mistake becomes their warning." Boromir's eyes focused on Drizzt with fading clarity. "The ring whispers to you too. I see it in your eyes, the constant struggle. How do you resist?" "By remembering that I've fallen before," Drizzt said quietly. "In Menzoberranzan, I almost surrendered to Lolth's will, almost accepted that being drow meant being evil. I stood at the edge of that choice and stepped back only because someone, my father, showed me there was another path. You did the same today, Boromir. You stepped back. That makes you stronger, not weaker. Then do not let my death be meaningless." Boromir gasped. "Promise me. You'll protect Frodo, get the ring to Mount Doom, end this. End the cycle of temptation." "I swear it," Drizzt said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "On my father's memory and my own honor, the ring will be destroyed." Boromir smiled through blood-stained teeth. "Good. Then I held the line long enough." The captain of Gondor died with his hand in Drizzt's, and the drow closed those noble eyes with reverent care. Aragorn arrived moments later, took one look at the scene, and his face hardened with grief and determination. "The Fellowship is broken," Aragorn said. "Frodo and Sam have gone toward Mordor alone. Merry and Pippin are taken by orcs. We cannot pursue all paths." "Then we choose," Gandalf declared, and there was iron in his voice. "Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, you pursue the Uruk-hai and rescue the hobbits. Drizzt, you come with me. We follow Frodo's path." "Why separate?" Drizzt asked. "Together we're stronger." "Together we make Frodo a target," Gandalf interrupted. "The Fellowship's purpose was to protect the ring-bearer to Mordor's borders. But now Frodo has chosen to walk the final path alone, or nearly so, with only Sam beside him. We cannot force ourselves upon him, but we can ensure his road is clear of obstacles." "You mean to draw Sauron's attention," Drizzt realized, "to make ourselves the obvious threat while Frodo slips through unnoticed." "Precisely," Gandalf confirmed. "And you, who the ring specifically called to this world, will be the perfect bait. Sauron believes you might serve him or be corrupted. Let him focus on that possibility while the true ring-bearer walks a quieter path." It was sound strategy, though it meant walking deliberately into greater danger. Drizzt looked at Boromir's body one last time, then at Aragorn and the others. "Then we make his sacrifice count," Drizzt said. "We become the distraction that saves Middle-earth." They buried Boromir with honor, setting him in a boat and sending him over the falls, a funeral for a warrior who had faced his darkest moment and chose redemption. Then the Fellowship, now broken but not destroyed, split to pursue their separate paths. Drizzt and Gandalf turned east, toward Mordor's shadow. And with every step, the ring's whisper grew louder, more insistent, more seductive. But Drizzt Do'Urden walked on, one choice at a time, one step at a time, proving that resistance wasn't about never being tempted. It was about choosing not to surrender again and again and again for as long as strength held. The black gates of Mordor stood before them like the maw of some primordial beast, all iron and malice made architectural. Drizzt crouched in the rocks beside Gandalf, watching the endless stream of orcs and trolls marching through those gates in columns that suggested mobilization for war. The air itself tasted of ash and corruption, and the whisper in his mind had become a constant scream. "Come home. You belong here, in darkness, in shadow. Stop pretending to be what you are not. Embrace your true nature. Take the ring and become what you were always meant to be." "The ring knows you're close," Gandalf observed, studying Drizzt's face with concern. "I can see the strain. How much longer can you resist?" "As long as necessary," Drizzt replied through gritted teeth. "Frodo and Sam are somewhere ahead, approaching Mount Doom, and we drew Sauron's attention as planned. The Eye searches for threats among the obvious warriors while 2 hobbits slip through his defenses. We hold here until—" A horn blast interrupted him, not from Mordor but from the west. Drizzt turned to see an impossible sight. Armies marching under the banners of Gondor and Rohan, thousands strong, approaching the Black Gates in open challenge. And at their head rode Aragorn, no longer dressed as a ranger but bearing the heraldry of Elendil's heir. "The fool," Gandalf breathed, though there was affection in his voice. He challenges Sauron directly to draw every eye away from Frodo's approach. It's suicide. It's fellowship, Drizzt corrected, understanding Aragorn's strategy instantly. He gives Frodo the time he needs by making himself the more obvious threat. Then we must support him, Gandalf decided, rising from concealment. Come, Drizzt. One last battle before the end. They emerged from hiding as Aragorn's army reached the gates. The Ranger King saw them and smiled grimly, a greeting between warriors who understood that some stands had to be made regardless of survival odds. The gates opened with the sound of grinding stone and tortured metal, and from Mordor's depths poured an army that made the gathered free people seem like children's toys. But the Drow Ranger and the Wizard joined the line, weapons ready, and when the armies crashed together, they fought with the fury of those who knew this battle wasn't about winning. It was about buying time measured in heartbeats for two hobbits climbing a mountain. Drizzt became shadow incarnate, his scimitars painting arcs of death through orc flesh, while Gwenhwyvar, summoned one final time despite the cost, tore through enemies like a hurricane of claws and fury. He felt the ring's influence even in combat, whispering that if he only claimed it, he could end this battle instantly, save everyone, become the hero he'd always wanted to be. But he'd heard that song before, knew how it ended. He fought on, one enemy at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of resistance at a time. Beside him, Aragorn wielded Andúril, the sword reforged from Narsil's shards, with the skill of his Númenórean lineage. Legolas's arrows never missed, and Gimli's axe sang a song of dwarven vengeance. Gandalf's staff blazed with white fire that drove back the darkness. They were losing, slowly, inevitably, and the sheer weight of numbers pressing them back. But they were buying time, and time was all that mattered. Then the earth shook. Drizzt felt it through his feet, a fundamental shifting of reality itself, as though the world's bones were breaking. The fighting paused as all combatants turned toward Mordor's heart, where Mount Doom erupted in flame and thunder. The dark tower of Barad-dûr swayed like a tree in hurricane wind, and from its pinnacle came a scream that transcended sound. The shriek of Sauron himself as the One Ring, his very essence, was unmade in the fires of its creation. The ring's whisper in Drizzt's mind cut off instantly, and the sudden silence was so profound that he staggered. 2 centuries of fighting Lolth's influence had been constant background noise. Weeks of the ring's corruption had been like standing in a storm, and now, nothing. Just his own thoughts, clean and clear and entirely his own. Around them, Sauron's army disintegrated. Orcs fled in mindless panic, trolls collapsed as the will driving them failed, and the Nazgûl, swooping toward the battle on their fell beasts, veered away in shrieking confusion as their master's death scream echoed across dimensions. The armies of the free peoples stood in stunned silence, then erupted in cheers that shook the very stones. "They did it," Aragorn breathed, lowering Andúril with trembling hands. "The hobbits destroyed the ring." Gandalf's face was wet with tears. Against all hope, against all odds, they walked into the fire and unmade the enemy's greatest work. The ring is destroyed, even Sauron with it. Drizzt felt something unlock in his chest, a weight he'd carried since arriving in Middle-earth suddenly lifted. The test was over, the temptation was ended, and he had not fallen. But the cost became apparent as eagles, great birds bearing Gandalf's mark, flew toward Mount Doom and returned bearing 2 small broken forms. Frodo and Sam lived but barely, burned, starved, and bearing wounds that went deeper than flesh. The Fellowship regathered in the days that followed in the ruins of Mordor's gate, where an impossible victory had been won. Aragorn tended the hobbits with a healer's care, and Drizzt stood watch over them with the protective ferocity of one who understood how close they'd all come to utter destruction. When Frodo finally woke, His eyes sought Drizzt immediately. You kept your promise, the hobbit whispered. You resisted. Even when the ring was at its strongest, you didn't fall. Neither did you, Drizzt replied. You walked into Mount Doom itself and destroyed what even the mightiest feared to touch. That's courage beyond any I've witnessed. I had help, Frodo said softly. Sam carried me when I couldn't walk. Gollum took the ring when I couldn't let go at the end. And you showed me that resistance wasn't about never being tempted. It was about choosing not to surrender again and again, no matter how hard it became. We all showed each other, Drizzt corrected. That's what fellowship means. We hold each other accountable. We remind each other of truth when corruption whispers lies. We carry each other when strength fails. Aragorn joined them, and there was something different in his bearing. A weight accepted rather than fled from. The ring is destroyed, and with it Sauron's power broken forever, but the world still needs healing. Gondor needs a king. Then claim your throne, Drizzt said. You've earned it through suffering and sacrifice. The line of Elendil will not fail this time. And you? Aragorn asked. What will you do now, Drizzt Do'Urden? You came to Middle-earth by the ring's call. With the ring destroyed, will you return to your world? Drizzt was silent for a long moment, feeling the absence where the ring's corruption had been. Gandalf had theorized that destroying the ring might return him to Faerûn, closing the dimensional breach it had created. Or it might not. He could be trapped here, in this strange world that had tested him more thoroughly than any trial in the Underdark. I don't know if I can return, Drizzt admitted. But if I can't, I've found something here worth staying for. People who judged me by deeds rather than appearance. Warriors who understand that resistance is daily work. A world that needs rangers to walk in shadow and guard the light. Then stay, Aragorn said simply. The north is vast and wild. The Dúnedain could use another ranger who understands what it means to stand alone against darkness. And Middle-earth could use someone who has faced corruption in its purest form and emerged with principles intact. Legolas approached, Gimli at his side in the unlikely friendship that had formed during their quest. The woodland realm would welcome you as well, the elf said. My father was wrong about you. We all were. You proved that heritage does not define destiny. And if you ever want to visit proper dwarven halls, Gimli added gruffly, there's always a place in Erebor for one who fought beside the Fellowship, even if you are an elf of sorts. Drizzt smiled, a genuine expression that felt strange after weeks of constant vigilance. I may take you up on those offers, but first, there's work to do. Sauron is destroyed, but evil doesn't end with one Dark Lord's fall. There will be remnants of his armies, orcs, and darker things fleeing into wilderness. They'll need hunting. Spoken like a true ranger, Gandalf approved, and his eyes held depths of knowledge. But know this, Drizzt, whether you stay in Middle-earth or return to your world, you have left your mark here. And the tale of the dark elf who resisted the One Ring will be written into our histories. Generations will speak of the Drow Ranger who walked beside the Fellowship and proved that courage comes in all forms. I don't need songs or legends, Drizzt said quietly. I just needed to know I could face the ultimate test and not break. The ring offered me everything I'd ever wanted. Acceptance, power, an end to loneliness. And I chose to reject it anyway. That's enough. But as the days passed and the Fellowship prepared to part ways, Aragorn to Gondor for his coronation, the hobbits to the Shire, Legolas and Gimli to their respective homes, Drizzt felt something shifting in reality around him. The dimensional breach was closing, reacting to the ring's destruction. He stood on a hillside overlooking Gondor's white city on the night before Aragorn's crowning. feeling the pull of his homeworld growing stronger. Gandalf found him there, as the wizard always seemed to find those who needed wisdom. "You're being called back," Gandalf observed. "I can sense the magic unraveling. Soon you'll return to the world you left." "I should be relieved," Drizzt said. "The companions of the Hall, my true family, they're back in Faerûn. I've missed them terribly, but you found something here too," Gandalf finished. "Purpose. Proof that your resistance has meaning. Brothers in arms who understand your struggle." "Will I remember?" Drizzt asked. "When I return, will this have been real, or will it fade like a dream?" Gandalf smiled, ancient and kind. "What is real, Drizzt Do'Urden? And the battles you fought were real. The choices you made were real. The resistance you demonstrated was real. Whether memory remains or fades, those things happened. They changed you, they changed us. That cannot be unmade." "Then I suppose this is farewell," Drizzt said, extending his hand. Gandalf clasped it warmly. "Not farewell, simply until we meet again, whether in this life or another, in this world or beyond it. You walk in shadow to guard the light. That calling transcends dimensions." The pull became irresistible, reality bending around Drizzt like a closing fist. The last thing he saw was Aragorn's city gleaming white under stars that had witnessed the ending of the Third Age and the beginning of the Fourth. Then darkness, not threatening but transitional, folded around him. When Drizzt opened his eyes, he stood in Icewind Dale beneath familiar stars, Twinkle and icing death at his belt and Genweavar purring beside him. The companions of the Hall came running, Bruenor shouting dwarven oaths, Catti-brie with bow ready, Wulfgar towering and concerned. "Drizzt!" Catti-brie called. "You've been standing there for near an hour, staring at nothing. We thought you'd been enchanted." An hour. In Middle-earth, he'd spent weeks on impossible quest, but here, barely any time had passed. "I'm fine," Drizzt said, and realized it was true. "Just processing something." But as the companions led him back to their camp, trading familiar jokes and comfortable insults, Drizzt felt the memory beginning to fade. Not disappearing entirely, but softening, becoming dreamlike. He strained to hold on to details: Aragorn's gray eyes, Gandalf's wisdom, and Boromir's redemption, Frodo's courage. And the ring's whisper that he remembered with crystal clarity. The test he'd faced and overcome. The proof that his lifetime of resistance had meaning and purpose. That night, making camp with his family, Drizzt pulled out his journal and began to write. The details might fade, but the lesson would remain. That corruption could be resisted, that heritage didn't define destiny, and that fellowship, true fellowship, made possible what isolation made impossible. In another world, in another time, the Fourth Age of Middle-earth dawned with Aragorn crowned king and the free peoples beginning to rebuild. And in their histories, in the margins of the great tales, a small notation appeared. And there walked among the fellowship one called Drizzt, a dark elf from beyond the circles of the world, who bore shadow in his flesh but light in his heart. He stood against the One Ring's corruption and did not fall, proving that evil can be resisted by those who choose resistance daily. His time in Middle-earth was brief, but his example endures. That we are defined not by what we are born to be, but by what we choose to become. The road goes ever on. In the years that followed, Drizzt Do'Urden would face countless battles across Faerûn, against drow assassins, demonic incursions, and the endless machinations of those who sought power through darkness. Each time temptation whispered its promises, each time corruption presented itself as pragmatic necessity, he would remember a world he'd visited for mere weeks, but that had tested him more thoroughly than centuries of struggle. And he remembered a ring that had called him across dimensions because it sensed vulnerability, and learned that vulnerability acknowledged was vulnerability controlled. He remembered a fellowship that had watched him with suspicion but chose to trust his deeds over his appearance. He remembered a captain of Gondor who fell to temptation and found redemption in sacrifice. Most of all, he remembered two small hobbits who carried a burden that would break gods and chose to walk into fire rather than surrender to darkness. The memory faded with time, details blurring into impressions. But the core truth remained. Resistance to corruption was not about never being tempted. It was about choosing again and again, moment by moment, to reject what darkness offered. And it was about surrounding yourself with those who held you accountable when your own strength wavered. It was about understanding that evil wasn't defeated through grand gestures, but through countless small choices made by ordinary people who refused to become what the world expected them to be. And so Drizzt walked the surface world of Faerûn with Gwenhwyvar at his side, Twinkle and Icing Death ready, and the knowledge that he had faced the ultimate test of his principles and emerged intact. The Ring of Power had called to him, the Nazgûl had hunted him, and the whisper of absolute corruption had screamed in his mind for weeks without end. He had said no. That simple refusal, repeated daily, hourly, constantly, had been enough. Not because he was stronger than others, not because he was immune to temptation, but because he had learned through painful experience that surrender offered no true rest. Only resistance, difficult as it was, led to peace. In Menzoberranzan, far beneath the surface, the drow still worshipped their demon goddess and plotted against each other in endless cycles of cruelty. They would look at Drizzt's rejection of their ways and call it weakness, foolishness, the delusion of one too soft for reality's harshness. They were wrong. Drizzt Do'Urden had walked in darkness deeper than the Underdark could comprehend. He had heard promises more seductive than Lolth had ever whispered. He had been tested by evil that had corrupted kings and broken empires. And he had walked away. That, more than any sword skill or ranger craft, was his greatest strength. The proven ability to face corruption in its purest form and choose the harder path. Not because it was easy, not because victory was assured, but because it was right. The road goes ever on, through Middle-earth and Faerûn, through test and triumph, through corruption resisted and fellowship honored. And wherever that road led, Drizzt Do'Urden would walk it with principles intact, proving that heritage does not define destiny. Only choice defines destiny. And he had made his choice.